What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of At Home with Mark. Today, season 8, episode 5. It's hard to believe we've been doing this for 8 seasons, but episode 5, we got a good one. We got Mr. David Ross here to talk about guitar lutherie. We're going to talk about guitar pedals, effects, all the stuff. David, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Hey, good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So you're gonna have to. We barely know each other. We got to know each other a little bit before the show, so we're gonna get into your history and how you've gotten to where you are now. I like to say from cradle to now. But my first question to you is the same for everybody, David. What is your earliest musical memory?
That's interesting. Earliest musical memory. Well, my father, for many years, in addition to being a live performing musician, actually taught guitar out of our home. And so, probably the earliest memory that I have in terms of music is him playing the Beatles with his students. That's
Oh, okay.
probably, yeah, I would say that's probably the earliest one. Either that or playing the recorder in school.
Yeah,
I
I think
I
we all
actually
have
had
that memory.
definitely. I actually have a decent memory when it comes to that because I had a very nice recorder teacher, and I learned to play it pretty well, but just never kept up with it. But it was probably one of those two things.
Now, that's interesting about the recorder, because like, why isn't that instrument used past elementary school kind of thing? Like, because I feel like there is like a substantial timbre, like a quality to that instrument that could be cool in the right context. And why hasn't anybody taken a recorder and put it through effects pedals still?
I tend to agree. Like I've noticed, like the drop off after elementary school has got to be like
Massive.
yeah, massive.
Yeah.
And I think what I really would like is like a MIDI recorder, like
Hmm.
just to have like the woodwind aspect of it. Um, it's loud, like you can't really play it in the middle of the night. Um, but yeah, the recorder. It's one thing I realized recently is that the recorder is a very nice instrument when it's accompanied by other instruments.
Yeah.
But
No one's hear that solo.
no, but when it's on its own, it's kind of a sharp, harsh, very kind of focused sound. Like
Mhm.
I think also like tenor recorder is very nice because it has like a nice smooth type of sound. But everybody plays soprano recorder, and it's just like when you're in the 8th grade, like you're just blowing into it as hard as you possibly can, and like blowing out your ears.
Yeah.
Recorder is definitely it's an interesting one for sure.
It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite instrument, but I mean, I feel like it can be cool. I have a bandmate who plays sax in the band, and he was like, "I gotta get a soprano sax again," because I guess he sold it years ago. And I was like, "Don't do that. Get a flute so we can play some Jethro, man." And
Flutes are very nice, yeah.
oh, I love flute, dude. I love clarinet. I love sax, and I love flute. I used to play trumpet, so I have a soft spot in my heart for that. But that's a hard instrument too to like have on a bandstand sometimes. It's because it's so cacophonous. It's so loud. And it's not my favorite thing to hear somebody solo on a trumpet unless you're Miles Davis. Like I don't find that when I roll up into a bar and I see a horn section, if they're like throw it to the trumpet player to blow over the changes, I'm never like, yes. Whereas if somebody's playing an alto and it's a funk band and they're soloing, I'm like, yes. Like there's a big difference in those instruments. Well, let me ask you. So, since you had a parent who exposed you to this stuff very early, because I didn't have that.
Mhm.
Um, so like, how far back are we going that you have memories of that? Like, how old were you?
Probably 3 or 4.
Okay, well,
Yeah, like very, very young, very early on, because, it would basically be, all throughout the week, he's giving lessons. And so, I'm hearing like the Grateful Dead, I'm hearing the Beatles, um, bands like that. And I can't say I'm like I was ever really a huge fan of those bands, probably because I heard them, all the time, and so never
mm-hmm.
really felt compelled to listen to them after that. But um, yeah, music was always around. Like, also in addition, I mentioned my father's a live musician. Um, he plays avant-garde jazz, and so I would always hear that as well. Like, I'd hear the theremin, I'd hear electric guitar, I'd hear keyboards, vocals, all that type of instruments. So
Mhm.
um, yeah, like I said, music was just always around.
Okay. Do you feel like it made that music less cool because you heard it so much and because it was coming from a parent? Like because I love the Dead and I love the Beatles, but my parents didn't expose me to that. I found that stuff on my own.
I kind of feel like, when you're hearing, uh, Strawberry Fields Forever, or, Fire on the Mountain, you're hearing those songs like so often. I feel like if I had discovered them on their own, I might have been, I might have been more receptive to it. But I've, I also, it might just be a taste thing. Like the Beatles, I like, this is, heresy, but I just, I just find their music to be a little bit too kind of 50s pop. Like, and I know
Mhm.
they evolved later on, but I still, it's still kind of like an old style of rock to me. And so I never could quite connect with it. Like later on, 70s and 80s, that was, that's kind of where I began as far as like rock music is concerned.
Okay. So then what's the, like, latest like, what's the last thing you were listening to, even if it was today? Like, what's the last record or, like, the last song you were listening to?
Well, I'm definitely like, I'm very much into metal music at this
Okay,
point.
that's fine.
And
I'm into
so,
that.
what would, I might have been listening to, the thing that comes to mind is Dark Throne's first album. Um, it is Soulside Journey. It's actually a death metal album. This was the album that they made before they got into black metal, and
Mhm.
it's an interesting album. I've been going on like a kind of a long journey as far as like history of music, like history of metal, and it's actually interesting to see like where black metal bands kind of originated from. And it basically all started with like Black Sabbath, and then there was kind of a death metal phase in like the late '80s, and then it kind of evolved into what it is now in the '90s. But anyways, that's a long tangent. But
No, I mean, that's an interesting tangent because, like, I want you to educate me here a little bit because let's take a second because I hear the term tossed around all the time, like black metal, and like I will say not super familiar. And to
mhm,
think about, and I've often thought about like a band like Black Sabbath. If you listen to them now, it's obviously nowhere near, even to like the Pantera, world, like that I grew
sure,
up kind of loving that stuff when I was a kid. Like Cowboys from Hell was like an album that my friends and I listened to all the time when we were young.
right,
But what's interesting to me is like, okay, so if it started at Black Sabbath, or even we could say, and people say this, and this is a Beatles thing, but people say Helter Skelter was almost like the start of like metal, if you
mhm.
listen to that song. But if we take in consideration like Black Sabbath to now to like what black metal is, and you have to explain to me what that is, but where's it gonna go from there? Like,
Right.
is it gonna just be white noise or like what's gonna happen? You know what I mean? Like, is there, and I know there's melody and a lot of cool stuff in metal, but like what's the transition? Like explain to me like the history of where it's come and where it's going.
Uh, well, where it came from, Black Sabbath. Basically, what happens? Black Sabbath's first album is kind of the definitive metal album, where it's like there was, people kind of flirting with the metal sound, like Deep Purple and maybe Iron Butterfly. But Black Sabbath, their first album, that was really kind of the tipping point where it had it had a certain sound and a certain vibe to it. It was a very ominous, kind of dark sound, much more so than anything that came before it. And if you listen to it now, it's like, it's more like classic rock type of
Mhm.
vibe. But like for the time, it was like it was very much, very dark and very foreboding and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then over time, I would say metal, it got more and more extreme. Like people were basically inclined to push the limits as far as they could. And so you went from like Black Sabbath to a band like Venom or a band like Slayer, where it's even more dark and even more evil, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so like Slayer, like very early Slayer, um, I think mid '80s, like they had like a proto black metal sound where it's like very fast and fairly simple, fairly primitive. Then there were other bands like Celtic Frost or Hellhammer, which were even more like had the Black Sabbath type of vibe, but even more primitive, even more kind of slowed down. And yeah, it kind of just kept on getting like more and more extreme to where it is now. Um, I feel like it kind of went up to a top of a hill, and now I feel like we're kind of on the other side of that, where
Mm.
I don't really see black metal getting any more extreme than it was in the early to mid '90s. Like that's as far as extreme is concerned, that's probably when it peaked in
Mm-hmm.
terms of not only music but also in terms of the people making it. It
It's
was definitely a time and place. Yeah.
yeah. Do you think technology has informed that a bit? Like if Black Sabbath, it's Tony Iommi, right? Guitar
Yes.
player. Oh God, thank God. um, if he would have had the technology that we have now with the gear we have now, at that time, in terms of pedals, in terms of higher gain amplifiers, in terms of like how different would it have been at that point? You know what I mean? Like it's an interesting thing to think about because come mid 80s with the implementation of more kind of technology getting inserted and injected into, I don't know, amplifiers, pedals like Boss and all that stuff. I wonder how that has helped change and morph the genre. All genres really.
Sure.
But that genre in particular when you're talking about gain.
Mhm. I would say it's a bit tough to say, but basically, like they were using what was available to them at the time. So if like Pro Tools was available back then, they almost certainly would have been using it. And as far as like black metal is concerned, so like if you listen to like early black metal demos from late '80s, early '90s, like these were people who basically had like 4-track machines, and you know they had a band, and so the recordings were really rough because they were basically just doing it themselves.
Mhm.
And it's not dissimilar to what's happening now, as far as people sitting in a bedroom and they can make an album. It's kind of similar back then, but back then it was a lot more limited in terms of what they could afford to use, what they could afford to record with. And
Mhm.
so I mean, if they had technology like we do today, they certainly would have been using it, I'm sure.
Mhm. It's just interesting to me to think about that because of like even the arc that I've gone through and the gear that I've owned and sold throughout the years and the amps that I've had and that how I did almost too like there's stuff that I own that I don't think I really understood it. And I don't think I was using it to its potential at the time.
Mhm.
Um there's a couple things I can think of that I own that I was like, oh God, I wish I had those again because I feel like I understand gear and I understand the symbiotic relationship between tubes and power tubes, preamp tubes, and all that stuff, and how to use an amp properly. But just even being a kid in the early '90s and playing through like a Marshall half stack for the first time, I was like, okay, this, like you said, this is like a primitive, like primal guitar moment,
Sure.
comparatively speaking. But I mean, I didn't chill out and start playing bluesy or dad rock tones until I was probably why did that happen? So like I didn't start doing that stuff probably until I was in my like early 20s. Um, but like before that, listening to like I loved Tool. Like where is Tool on the arc of like metal when that's when you consider that?
That's an interesting question. I like Tool and I've listened to them a fair amount. Uh, I wouldn't really consider them to be metal. They're kind of metal adjacent. Like there are some bands, like I think Nine Inch Nails is probably a good example. Although I'm not really familiar with the band.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they have maybe a metal aesthetic, maybe some metal type sounds, but wouldn't really be considered a metal band. That's kind of where I feel Tool is. Um, I kind of find them to be more of like a progressive rock
Mm-hmm.
type of bands, more so than what I would think of as metal. But um,
Yeah, man. I can see them being like a heavy yes.
right, right,
Like they're like very interesting time signature choices, like arrangements of music, very thoughtful. Even like how their albums are recorded, I think there's a lot of attention to detail and how they're putting things together. It's not just like thrown together and slapped together, kind of see what sticks. That's very interesting. I mean, I Undertow was like another one of those records where I was like, whoa, what is this? As a kid. And you listen to bands like Helmet and like Tool and like first time you hear Master of Puppets, you're like, whoa, dude, like this is so dangerous. You know what I mean? Like this music is so dangerous. And now I'm like, man, if you listen back to those records now comparative to what's out these days with thrash metal and all that stuff, you're just like, this is tame compared to like what's happening right now.
I will say, like those early Metallica albums, like I feel like if you played it in like at like a hardcore show or a metal show now, and like nobody ever heard that music before, I still think some of those songs would still go over well. Like
Oh yeah.
Enter Sandman, like that's a heavy song. Like that intro is like that's that's heavy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But um yeah, like some of those songs I think they would still go over well today.
Mm-hmm. Man, I see that's the thing that's what I love about music is I have so many different genres that I like to listen to, and I feel like almost manic sometimes when I get in the car because I'm like, at one moment I'll listen to Nora Jones, and then when the drive home I'm listening to Tool or whatever. It's just I really appreciate music at its core, because I know the blood and the sweat and the tears that go into doing it, as do you. I mean, you've
Definitely.
witnessed it in your life, but it's just there's something joyful about like being able to appreciate everything and to take bits and pieces of all those things and kind of put it in your own DNA in a way.
Definitely. Yeah, like I'm the same way. Like I'll listen to Pantera and then I'll listen to like the Backstreet Boys.
Right.
And
Yeah.
like there's no rhyme or reason to it. Like I'm happy with whatever.
Yeah,
But
man.
yeah, like if you like the music, then like I make no apologies as far as like what I like in terms of music. Like I like some really off the wall stuff, but I also like some, like mainstream stuff, like, Dolly Parton or Michael Jackson or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. I mean, why not? It's all good stuff. Um, well, let me ask you. So, okay, you grew up around guitar. When did you start getting interest? When was your interest peaked to the point where you're like, I might want to try that?
Uh, it wasn't really me even thinking about it. What basically happened was when I was 13, my parents bought me a Behringer Strat copy, and they were like, here, like, this is your guitar now. Like, you're going to, like my father would give me lessons, and that's really how it happened. Like, I played a bunch of different instruments, but never really connected with any of them. Like, I played recorder, and while I was like pretty good at it, like just never really connected with it. I tried piano, I tried drums, and got like competent at each of them, but eventually just kind of gave up on them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, with guitar, I was playing for like 2 years or so. My father giving me lessons, just kind of going over the fundamentals, and it was actually when I learned or when I realized that I could play "For Whom the Bell Tolls" by Metallica. Um, it all clicked for me, like because that's the music that I was into at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
so being able to play that like poorly, but even so, like being able to play it was like it was a real epiphany for me.
Now, are you talking about the Cliff Burton part, the bass part? Or are you talking about the
Uh,
dun, dun, dun?
at first just the rhythm, but then eventually I learned the lead part,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was just kind of snowballed from there. Just became obsessed with it,
Okay.
and learned as much as I could.
Let me ask you this, and be honest with me.
Okay.
Was it a good thing to have your dad teach you, or do you think learning from somebody that wasn't a family member would have been more advantageous? The reason I'm asking this is because I have a daughter who I've given lessons to who doesn't practice enough and then wants to like be able to play all these Taylor Swift songs. I'm like, bro, you have to practice. So
Mhm.
it's a hard relationship there. How was that for you?
Um, I would say it was a good thing. It was a good thing for me just because, um, like learning the fundamentals, like, when you're playing for like the first year or two, like it's not really that enjoyable. Like your fingers hurt and you're not really seeing that much progress. But basically, if you can stick with it for about 2 years, you'll reach the point where you can actually start to play some songs and put it together. And once that happens, you you'll either continue to kind of fumble along, and like maybe you're not into it, you're not passionate about it, but you might also realize, like I did, that I really there's really something to this. There's something valuable to this, and something that I really enjoy, and you'll just take off from there.
Yeah. It's true. I think that's a good shelf, like self-discovery is the 2-year mark. Because it does make a big difference. And I guess it's all kind of a matter too of like how much you put into it is what you're gonna get out of it too. But and I don't know if there's a magic age at which, you know, kids get into it and stick with it. I mean, I started in middle school, so I mean, and I stuck with it, but not everybody I know that started at that point stuck with it.
Sure.
So and maybe I'm just an idiot and I'm a masochist and I keep going back to it forever. But like, but I think that is a good benchmark. Like that 2-year frame is that's when a lot of the kind of helping your future self takes place
Right, right.
as a musician.
Yeah, that's something that my father actually mentioned. He mentioned it to like other guitar students, where he basically says like around 2 years, like that's usually around the time where you're going to see some real progress. And it like you said, however much you put into it is what you can get out of it. And I would say like the first 2 years, I don't know that I put in really that much work into it, but I put in enough to where it eventually paid off. And I think it's certainly true that what you put into it, you get out of it. Like, I mean, if you play 6 hours a day, like you're going to see some results, like for sure.
Yeah. So you did not do that the first 2 years.
No, I probably played, maybe 20 minutes a day or something, if that. It's just kind of sticking with it, but not, it wasn't really an obligation, but it was just like, just kind of stumbling along, and, just kind of sticking with it, but, being somewhat consistent with it. I
Keep
think
it in
that,
the periphery kind of thing.
yeah, like I think probably consistency, like even if you're not the most consistent, but like if you play, 4 or 5 times a week, that's probably enough for most people, to where eventually you'll get to the point where you're, playing every day. And like if you start to play like a half an hour a day, if you really become passionate about it, you play even more and more. So
Mhm. Mhm. Well, so how did that kind of parlay into you being interested in the instrument itself to like start either fabricating, fixing, managing, upkeeping instruments? Like when did that curiosity pop for you that you were like, I want to adjust this truss rod or I want to change these pickups or like cuz that's that's something I've never done, David, because I'm so scared I'm gonna screw something up. And only until recent did I talk to like the guy that I was telling you, the luthier that I go to. And he's like, dude, if you want to try something, just try it. If you screw it up, I can fix it. As long as you don't
Sure.
rip the neck off and break it in half, like I can fix whatever you might think you screwed up and you probably didn't. But like, how did that happen for you and how'd that materialize?
I would say it was probably after 4 years of playing that, um, I got interested in, like, just the mechanics of the instrument. Like, I had the Behringer Strat copy, and it just wasn't really doing it for me for whatever reason, and so I just took it apart, and I kinda saw how it all went together, and, I naively thought, like, this isn't so complicated, like, I see what's going on here," and, just really became fascinated with the mechanics of the instrument. Um, different types of guitars, like different scale lengths, different body shapes, everything. And yeah, probably 4 years in. And also to your to what you were saying, what I would recommend you or anybody who's interested in getting into like guitar repair or going down that type of rabbit hole, buy like a used like $100 Strat and just do whatever you want with it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
change the pickups, like because you don't want to do this on like a $2,000 Les Paul or something. Like
Mm-hmm.
you'll eventually reach the point where you know you can fix whatever mistake you made. Like if you stick with it, it's just like guitar playing. I mean, if you stick with it and you learn from your mistakes, there's no reason why you or anybody else can't be great at repairing or building guitars. So,
Right. I don't know about building. I don't want any part of that, but but I would just like to like understand how to like, you know, affect relief
mhm,
and like make sure that the guitar feels good in my hands. And because when you're talking about, I mean, I was telling you I have that Strat that's an open C. The strings on there are 17 to 60,
gotcha.
and it's tuned low C to high C. It's 1 5 1 3 5 1 in terms of intervals. And they're like piano wire, right? So it's like when I put that on there was no way I was going to put that on there myself and try to adjust the neck because I'm like, I have no clue how this is going to affect. Granted, you're dropped down 2 whole steps, right? So that's
Mm,
going to help a little bit with the tension, but it's still, and that neck even that's like just on like an American standard Strat. That neck even pulls a bit. Like I have to get him to adjust it like twice a year because
mhm,
it'll move.
right.
It's not a quarter saw neck. I had a Sir that I had that in it, and it was like a rock. It didn't move at all. But this guitar just it doesn't love it. I have to fight that instrument when I play it, which I kind of like when I have to fight
Mhm,
my guitars a little bit. But I never kind of got to the point where I felt comfortable adjusting the truss rod, adjusting the tension, like adjusting the saddles, because I'm like, I don't know, I don't know what I'm doing, dude.
sure.
Um, and I'm sure there's a lot of like I could get a book from Stu Mack to read up how to do that simple stuff.
That would be a good place. Like Dan Earlywine, Stuart McDonald. Um, that would be the place to go. Like what I would caution people against is, there's so much information, so many people on YouTube who they look as though they know what they're doing, but I've watched enough videos to know that there's a sizable amount of these people who are really not good at what they're doing, and you know, but you wouldn't know if you didn't know better.
Mhm.
And like there's a few people who I would recommend, like Dan Earlywine is certainly one of them. Um, and like the Stuart McDonald YouTube channel, like they have top level luthiers doing like common types of repairs and also like some very complicated repairs, and it's always a good reference.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. How many cracked Les Paul headstocks have you had to repair?
Not many. I've had a few. I've been So I've been doing guitar repair for about 15 years now, and I've been in business for the past 2.5. Um, so I haven't seen too many cracked headstocks. I've seen maybe probably less than half a dozen in that time, but it
Mm.
does come up. It does come up occasionally,
Mm-hmm.
and if it happens, it's really not the end of the world. Like, uh, it's usually not the end of the world, I should say. Like, no matter how bad of a broken headstock you have, there's somebody that can repair it. Like, I mean, as bad of a break as anything. Like, it's basically fixable.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare that it can't be fixed. Now, it might be expensive and it might be difficult, but I mean, there are people that can make it look, as good as new.
That's crazy. What
Yeah.
kind of glue are they using? Like hide glue, like for? I mean, what kind of glue do you have to use to like fix a problem like that?
I would suggest tight bonds, just like carpenter's wood glue, tight bond 1, tight bond 2, um, just wood glue. You basically want, like, if you're dealing with two surfaces that are made out of wood, um, that's like the most appropriate thing to use, because when you bond it together and you have a proper adhesion, like a properly made joint, the joint will actually be stronger than the wood itself. So if you were to break it again, it wouldn't break at the joint; it would break at another place in the headstock.
Hmm.
So if it's well done, if the repair is well done, you shouldn't have to worry about it breaking in the same place again.
Yeah, man, that's like the thing that I always have, the terror stories that I see with friends of mine who've had that happen, and I'm like, were you? How did that happen? First and foremost, like, were you spinning the guitar around your neck? Like, how did that? Because like, I don't. I mean, I've never dropped a guitar that hard. Put it that way. And I'm like, I don't. Maybe it's because I play in a jam band, but like, I'm not. All I'm doing is standing still. But man, that's crazy. All right, let's shift focus because we're gonna run out of time, and I really want to talk to you about your like foray into the effect market.
Sure.
So you just did this Kickstarter for the Submersion pedal, right? And that was successful.
Mhm.
Um, how did you like? Because like I know like electronics and a guitar and electronics and a pedal, it's a different world. Um, so like, how did you get into wanting to mess with circuits? Did you start off by like doing like some build kits and like enjoying it, and then wanting to do like your own creative thing?
Well, I would say that in terms of like guitar repair, um, like you're dealing with kind of electronics anyway, so like you're dealing with volume and tone controls, output jacks. So for me, it was kind of a natural progression as far as going into guitar pedals. um, so I basically started with just like a simple kit for like a basically an MXR micro amp, which is just like a one knob clean boost.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it was challenging. It was definitely difficult, but yeah, just like anything, like the more you do it and the more time you invest in something, like, you're going to see returns at some point. And I basically just stuck with it. And I just, kept on expanding, kept on growing in terms of my knowledge of circuits and guitar pedals and that type of thing. And eventually got to the point where I released a guitar pedal called the Winter Storm. And that was my first guitar pedal. I'm currently on my third with the Kickstarter being uh, completed for the Submersion. I'm right in the middle of that one, and yeah, it's just like I said, it's kind of a natural progression, and just accumulating knowledge over past 6 or 7 years or so.
Mm. Yeah, it's pretty fresh, I would say. 6 or 7 years. That's like what the future holds for you is pretty bright in terms of moving forward and everything too.
Sure.
Um, did you so for because I tried to build a kit one time, and my buddy has a company called Mason Effects, and Curtis like had me come over and like we built this fuzz face circuit.
Mhm.
That was based, I think it was based on the Analog Man Sun face. But he taught me how to solder that day. I'd never soldered before. So we like just sat next to each other. He was watching what I was doing, and I did it. And then we went to fire him up, and mine did not work, and his did, of course. But he's like a super crazy point-to-point guy. Like he's just a wizard with what he does with fuzz pedals. But it's harder than people think. It's like if you have like a cold solder joint or something like that, or there's something messed up, and you didn't meticulously follow what was going on or whatever, it won't work. So it's
Yeah.
like, but what I find interesting, you have to tell me how you did this, is like the creative process of creating a new circuit, even
Mhm.
if it's based on another idea from something that's been done before. I don't understand. Explain to me how components, how like ears can hear what components do, and how understanding what those components do can be the choice for the pedal. Because when you're talking about coming up with an original circuit, that seems very complicated to me in terms of like trial and error, trial and error, trial and error kind of thing.
Mhm.
Like how did you do it?
Um, well, I would say it's good to start with what's already out there, like what's already been made. Um, that I think is probably the place to begin, just because, like, if you have like an Ibanez tube screamer and you build a clone of one, you can kind of compare them together, and they'll be slightly different probably, but it's good to have references, I would say.
Mhm,
um, as far as component choices, like you can kind of uh, elaborate from there. Like once you have like a clone, you can kind of change some values and see what makes differences and what doesn't. As far as component choices, for me, I'm pretty clinical when it comes to that type of thing. I don't believe in magic components or anything like that.
mhm,
It all has to do with the value, like the values of resistors or capacitors or components like that. Um, so I would basically just say, like, if you're interested in like circuits, change individual components and see what happens.
mhm. So, or what are we saying here? Are we saying that the Klon myth is total garbage, and we shouldn't be all like sucked into the myth of the
Uh,
magical diodes like everyone talks about?
I'll say this: there are people in this industry who have positioned themselves as though these components make a difference to the overall sound or the overall vibe.
Mm,
And I think that, they make a non-zero difference. But, is it the type of difference that's, worth hundreds of dollars? I think not.
mhm,
Like on my website, there's a blog where I compare um, four different Ibanez tube screamers. Like I did like an 80s one. I did like a TS5. I did like a modern one, and then I breadboarded one. And
mhm,
like I made like videos comparing and contrasting each of them. The differences were marginal, I would say at best, between all
mm,
four of them. Uh, and basically, like when I design a circuit, like if I were to design like a new circuit or something that was based on something previously, I'm more concerned with the 97% of what the circuit sounds like, as opposed to the 3% of what it may or may not sound like if I change out a diode for something, or change out a capacitor or a resistor.
mhm,
Um, I just think you can pretty much hit a bullseye if you know, regardless of what components you use, as long as you follow the same values,
mhm.
you'll be pretty much there. So
Yeah.
it's the type of thing where it's really nothing to be concerned about, as far as you're not missing out on anything,
Yeah.
as far as that's concerned.
The FOMO for people with like the whole Klon Centaur thing. And I had a real Klon, man. I bought one for $300 in 2002, right from Bill Finnegan. Took 8 months to get it. And I toured with it. It was on my board all up and down the East Coast. Probably tons of sand on it when I was down playing on a beach somewhere. But it was always a great pedal, and I always enjoyed how it sounded and everything. But at some point, when those things got so expensive and people were selling them for $1,500 or something, I was like, it feels greedy to do this, but I want a new guitar, so I'm gonna sell that.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm like, it's just a pedal, man. And like all my good friends who are pro musicians and stuff were just like, dude, it's just an overdrive pedal, man. Like, there's so many other companies doing great clones of it. And when I heard the Tumnus, the Wampler Tumnus, and I bought it for whatever that was, $150. So it was one of the mini ones.
Right.
And I put it on my board next to the Klon Centaur. It was a silver Klon. It wasn't a gold Klon, non-horsey. But I was like, this sounds exactly the same. Like there is literally, if someone was outside of this room and I was A-Bing them, they would have no clue, what the difference between those two are. So I got a new guitar. Sold that thing. And it's like you see stuff like JHS, releasing the Nauticlon, and that was like such a really cool marketing campaign, and just brilliant.
It was,
Just brilliant.
It was very cool.
Yeah. And it sounds awesome, man. I have it. It's just it sounds great. $100, so it is interesting when you start to think about, do these components all make a difference? Well, yeah. I mean, I think everything makes a difference at some point. Like, you can't use crappy like Cracker Jack prize diodes, but like, for the most part, do I care about germanium or silicon transistors or whatever? Most of the time I don't really know. Like, it's like, I feel like they're all, silicon seems to be more stable for me for playing outdoor stages and stuff. So I kind of lean on those, but I just got a germanium, my first germanium fuzz face, and it's friggin' killing. So it's like, I think it's like a flavor of the day too, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Like the reason germanium isn't really produced anymore is like it wasn't good. Like it wasn't stable. Like it was stable, but like not as stable as silicone. So everyone went to silicone. Like guitar is like one of the only industries that actually cares about like this type of thing.
Like the minutia, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. Like, Apple doesn't care about this. Like they're putting in, surface mount components in, their products, and, but like we guitar players, like we think that there's a difference between that and like through hole. It's completely ridiculous. Like, but anyway, like, you can't convince certain people. Like I think that there is a certain percentage of people who they feel that they hear a difference. And like I've heard from like professional guitar players that like, oh yeah, like I have a tube screamer, and it's like I got it in like the 70s, and I feel like it's a better pedal than it is now. Like I played a newer one and I didn't think it was as good. It's like, well, like that person has been playing for like 40 years. Like I'm somewhat inclined to take their opinion to heart. But for me, like I said, I'm pretty clinical about this type of thing. Like, especially with repairing guitars, like I see, how these things were made, and like a good guitar, really, what it amounts to is attention to detail, craftsmanship. That's really what makes the difference. Like, a certain type of pickup from a certain year, whether or not it had a certain cover on it, or like these little, these micro things, that's usually not what makes the difference.
Have you, on that tip, have you had any like really cool guitars come across your bench lately? Like that you're like, oh man, this is a beauty.
Yes, but like I'm also like the type of person who like I have a Les Paul back there, and that's like my daily driver. So like I'm not in the market for like another guitar. Like I'm pretty well set. But a guy recently brought in a Gibson ES 175 custom shop guitar.
Cool.
very nice guitar. And yeah, like it's interesting, like doing this for a living, because you see all types of guitars. Like, I'll have somebody bring me in like a Squire Stratocaster for $300, or I'll have somebody bring in like the 175, which is 10 times that. And I I really don't have a preference as far as what I work on. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I like seeing them all. I like working on all of them. It's all good experience at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome, dude. Okay, so there's back to the pedals. There's 3 pedals in the lineup right now.
Right.
So Submersion, is that an octave fuzz, right?
It is. Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
have it
Oh, awesome. Cool. Nice.
right here if I can get it in frame. But
That's awesome.
yeah, uh, it's two things basically. Like, it has a kind of a standard volume control. Um, Basically, like, the way that it works is from the far left to the midpoint, it acts as a volume control, and then from the midpoint to the far right, it acts as a clean boost. And
Mm.
then the other control is it's a clean blend octave fuzz. So uh, when the control is at the far left, like, there's no difference in your signal. And then as you slowly engage it, um, it kind of brings in the octave up fuzz, kind of as an undertone. And then if you turn it all the way up, it's like a full on octave fuzz effect. So
Mhm.
it's actually kind of similar in terms of the Quan Centaur, in terms of functionality of the gain control, where
Right.
for the Quan, it's basically the same thing, but with overdrive or distortion, if you will.
Mhm. Now, is this pedal a product of, like, your musical interest in terms of, like that sounds like something that, Josh Homme would play, like a kind of stoner rock type vibe. Like, where was this inspired from?
Um, I would say, like, early on when I was getting into guitar pedals and making them for myself, um, I basically, the way that I work is I look for the simplest way of doing something and then kind of elaborate on that. So I found a schematic for like an octave up fuzz, basically, and basically just kind of tweaked stuff on the breadboard and just kind of elaborated on it. And yeah, eventually just got something where, like, I kind of feel like I made the perfect octave fuzz, where it's just everything I had um, in my head as far as like what a great octave fuzz would be.
Mhm.
Basically, put it into the Submersion.
Okay. Will it do that, like, ring modulator thing where it gets
Um, well, I would say it's ring mod is like it's a different type of effect, but if you were to go up, like, play past the 12th fret on the neck pickup, you can definitely get like
double
those kind
step?
of, yeah, those ring mod kind of sounds, like, especially if you like turn the volume down and like pick very lightly, you can kind of get those ring modulating types of sounds.
Nice. So it's definitely very dynamic and expressive in terms of, like, pick touch and everything.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with the ability to blend in like the clean signal, or blend in like the dirty signal, it really allows you to have as much or as little octave fuzz as you want. Like, one of the issues that I had with like previous octave fuzzes that I've used is, like, you turn them on and even at minimum, they're like just really overbearing.
Yeah.
And I like the ability to have like some subtlety um, in the effects. I mean, it can do like the full blast thing where like you just turn it up all the way and it's like it's super heavy. But
Mhm.
I for my playing, like, if I want to play something like, play some blues or play some kind of light rock, like, it definitely fits in that type of thing as well.
Yeah. That's my favorite thing about any kind of fuzz circuit is just, like, how well can it clean up? How
Yeah.
well can it handle, you rolling up and down the volume on your own guitar? Because I feel like people forget about, like, that's the motherboard, right? Like, the thing in our hands is the motherboard, and, like, we have the ability to control so much just from the volume on our instrument, the tone knobs on our instrument, to get so many, and pickup selection, so many different tones. And if a fuzz pedal can do that well, it's like, by my standards, it's like cream of the crop kind of thing. Because there are
Right.
some fuzzes that won't do that well, because it's like you said, like right out of the gate, if you start turning the fuzz up, if you're like just on 2, it's already screaming,
Yeah, yeah.
and then there's nowhere to go from there, you know.
Yeah, it's just like adding more kind of noise to it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's something that I wanted to avoid with this one, and also bring the octave effect to the forefront. It's another thing that I've noticed about octave fuzz pedals is uh, they can tend to be more fuzz than they are octave. And
Mm-hmm.
so you'll play and like you really have to hold the note for a long time in order for like the octave to kind of bloom into the sound. But
Mm-hmm.
with this, it's definitely more. It's definitely more octave, or it's as much octave as it is fuzz.
Right. That's pretty awesome, man. How long did that take for you, like from start to finish, development wise, like to get it to the point where you were happy?
I think this one it took over 3 years. I think it was like maybe 3.5 years.
Damn.
Um, yeah, usually what I try and do is have like a lot of different irons in the fire because I'll run into a roadblock or I'll get fed up with a circuit, and then I'll have to move on to something else. Otherwise, you're just kind of spinning your wheels and not really making much progress. But
Yeah.
yeah, this one it took about 3.5 years, and that seems to be fairly typical of my pedals. I think the Winter Storm took maybe 2.5. I think the Spellbook took maybe 2.5 or 3 years, something like that. And so that kind of seems to be the way that I've worked. Uh, Although I do have another one that I'm prototyping at the moment, and that's been pretty easy for me. And I think part of that has to do with just getting better at designing circuits and making choices as far as EQ and selections like that are concerned. So
Yeah. For people that don't know, tell them what the Winter Storm does and what the Spellbook does.
the Winter Storm, I actually have them all right here.
Oh, cool.
Winter Storm is it's a basically it's a 3-in-1 boost, overdrive, and distortion. Um, One thing that I like to do is have the ability to turn my pedals on and off and have there be a setting where there's no difference between the bypass signal and the affected signal. And so you can add as much or as little as you like in terms of tonal variation. So basically it's 4 controls. It's a volume, a gain, a bass and treble, and then a selector switch for the modes. So there's overdrive, boost, and also distortion. So that one's the Winter Storm. That was my first one. Then I have the Spellbook, which looks
That's
like
cool.
that. Yeah, this is actually completely different. This is a self-oscillating fuzz and distortion that can also be used as a standalone synthesizer. So it's actually it goes against what I just said. Like when you turn the pedal on, it screams like it.
Right.
And so basically, the idea behind that is if you play your guitar, you play through an oscillator, and eventually the oscillator comes back and it overwhelms the guitar signal as it decays. And
Mm,
so it's a bit tough to put into words. Like I would definitely suggest hearing it for yourself. Either checking out my YouTube channel or social media or wherever.
yep.
But yeah, it's definitely different, and yeah, you'll have to hear it to really understand what it does.
And then BV's in here moderating the chats as usual. So he's popped up all your stuff here. So there's the website. So go check out that website. Here's the Instagram. And then we got the YouTube right here. And then if you are still on Facebook looking around, there's Facebook. So thank you very much. And then MMK dropped in. I think this is when we were talking about if components matter and how much do they matter, but that was a little nod to you. All right, so David, it's time for the lightning round get down. Believe it or not, we are already at time, and I don't want to hold you up the entire evening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 10 questions, okay?
Okay.
So we're going to put on a metronome for some suspense because that's how I roll. I'm going to ask you 10 questions. Rapid fire. You can burn through them quick if you want, or you can explain your answers. Sometimes people like to do that. I love that.
Okay.
I don't mind. You don't have to race through it if you don't want to.
Sounds good.
Usually the first one's always the same, David. But since we had this whole discussion about the Beatles, I'm gonna change it. I'm gonna call an audible because it's usually
Okay.
Lennon or McCartney is usually always my first one. But let's do this. Let's get in Dave Mustaine's head. Metallica or Megadeth?
Metallica. Never really connected much with Megadeth. Never really listened to them too much. Metallica, although I don't really care for them, they've put out some good stuff. So I'm going to go with Metallica.
You can't deny them. They're like one of the founding fathers, right? All right. Maple or rosewood fingerboard?
Rosewood. Maple fingerboards tend to get dirty, and I don't like that. I like the feel of rosewood, and I like that it hides the grime.
Nice. Pineapple on pizza. Heck yes or heck no?
Heck yes, it's a perfectly legitimate topping.
Single coils or P90s?
Oh, that's tough. Recently, I've been going single coil. Yeah, I think I'm going to put single coil pickups in my Les Paul over there.
Oh man, okay. Okay. As a kid on the playground, hanging out on the monkey bars or the swings?
That's the toughest one yet. I'm going to go with swings because I could go really high up on the swings and then jump off really high. That was fun.
Yeah, that was the main reason I did it. And plus, all the girls used to hang out by the swings when I was a kid.
Another good reason.
Yeah, delay pedals. Do you prefer short slapback delays or do you like long delay?
Depends on my mood.
Okay, so no answer there. Anything
No.
goes. Okay,
Anything goes. Depends on the mood.
All right, good book or a good movie?
Geez, that's tough. I'm gonna say good movie because there are a lot of good books, but as far as movies, there aren't that many good movies.
Not lately. All right, working on the bench. What do you prefer? What do you think is the easier job? Is it easier to work on Strats or is it easier to work on like glued-in necks like a Les Paul?
I would say I prefer to work on like a Les Paul over a Strat, just because Strats, Fender, they tend to make some decisions which I don't particularly care for. Also, the tremolo system is a little bit more elaborate, and so I would say I prefer working on Gibson as opposed to Fender.
Dude,
Les Paul over Squire or Stratocaster.
I always block my tremolo on my Strats. I just don't use the arm. I don't know. I've never been able to resonate with it.
And then, of course, you can break off the arm and the block and the bridge. So forget it.
Right. All right. Night owl or early bird?
Night owl.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay. Up all night?
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
Okay.
To my own detriment, but yes. Yeah, my brain doesn't always cooperate when it's time to go to bed at a reasonable time. Sometimes you get into something and up all night.
It's over for that. Yeah. All right. Here's the last one, David. Sometimes this is the easiest. Sometimes it's the hardest. And I think you're going to have an interesting answer to this. But if you could take one album and erase it from your memory, just so you could go back and experience it for the first time again, what album would that be?
Hold on, let me cheat and look in my music file.
Yeah. I know it's hard, man.
Oh, geez. I don't think I can come up with something quickly. Does it have to be an album or can it be a live performance?
Sure. Yeah.
Can be a live performance?
Yeah, why not?
All right. I would choose Children of Bodom live in Korea 2001. That was
okay.
That's one of the first times. Actually, that was the second time I ever felt music. And I would think I was like 13 or 14. watched the entire show, was completely blown away. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely do it.
Oh, I'll check it out. Yeah, that band's been around for a minute, right? How old is that band?
They've been around since I believe they put out their first album in 1997. They've been around
Okay.
maybe mid 90s. The guitar player actually passed away a few years ago. A guy named Alexi Leho, who is or was and still is a phenomenal guitar player. Like was very influential to me in my playing, and yeah, just a great guitar player. And Children of Bodom, if you're into melodic death metal, like the cream of the crop, the best of the best.
Yeah, I've heard that name a gajillion times, but I've never checked them out. But I'll go check it out. My mind is open. My mind's open. All right, David. Anything else to promote? Anything else to let the people know what's going on?
Not at the moment. Basically, the Kickstarter, it's already been funded, so I'm just waiting for the funds to be released, and then I'm going to buy components for all the pedals for the folks that bought them, and yeah, I'm going to put them together and ship them out. But actually, if you go on my website and you want to get notified of when the Submersion is going to be in stock, because I'm planning on having it be available after the Kickstarter. There should be a pop-up where you can sign up to get notified of when the Submersion is in stock. So yeah, check that out. If you're so inclined, definitely check it out.
Well, there's a lot of fuzz heads on my channel, so Brad included, which I think Brad yep, there he is.
Gotcha.
Cool, man. Well, David, thank you so much for making some time, man. I'm glad we got to meet finally and have a little chat. And everybody support small businesses like this. There's so many people making great stuff these days. Why not support them all? We all could use an extra overdrive pedal or an extra fuzz pedal, right? Why not?
Absolutely.
Cool.
I know I could.
Hang tight for a second, David. Everybody else, BV, thank you again. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time.